that's what it is. Meeting is cross-friends. It is even I have it. That's all.
You have to sign in.
I'm already with Zoom. Even I have the access. Morning I signed for 100 times.
Sign in ಕೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದೆಯಾ? Sign in ಹೌದು sign in ಆಗಬೇಕು.
We do this.
No, so we are changing the Zoom ID. Just log in.
Just change the Zoom ID. The same ID.
The same ID.
Ma'am, do I start or wait? 2:30 हो गया?
2:30 हो गया सर.
आप
1 minute sir.
Sharp
on time sir. Okay sir. Bye. Oh God, I can't stop him.
Okay. ನಾನು ಕ್ಯೂ ಕೊಡಿ. Then also close by.
Everybody is muted.
Do I start?
Yeah, yes, I will start.
Okay. Good afternoon to one and all. Welcome to this webinar series being organized and conducted by MS Ramaiah Institute of Management. Today, I would be talking to you all on knowledge management in COVID times. It's a subject that's pretty passionate to me, and I've been involved in this area right from the time of my PhD, which was on learning organizations. The current scenario that all of us are facing, that of the pandemic, has definitely shaken the entire world. And it's important for organizations to recognize and realize how they need to understand the changes that are happening around them, how to cope with them, how to manage given the scenario. Knowledge is one of the critical resources that they can use to manage this pandemic and also survive and sustain themselves through this pandemic. I would look at my presentation in two small segments. The first segment is just the basics of knowledge in terms of the definition of knowledge and some basic elements of knowledge or progression of knowledge, and then go on to the specifics of managing the pandemic. Knowledge itself is defined as justified true belief. The very definition in its understanding has this element of justification and belief. And belief being an integral element of human beings requires us to appreciate that whatever is the information that is there, whatever is the element that's being presented, we need to believe it to be true. And once we are able to believe it's true and have justification for them, then that particular knowledge or that particular component is considered as knowledge. Knowledge also is defined as a fluid mix of framed experience, values, contextual information, and expert insight. In organizational context, it is the expert insight that gives better understanding and appreciation of the information that's presented or the data that's available, and the kind of insight this information is, one is able to draw from the information using their own experiences. When organizations are able to recognize the knowledge quotient that is available within them and they're able to tap into this knowledge resources, capitalize on it, make business sense out of it, then obviously they are in a very, very profitable domain. And it's not an easy task for most organizations to get involved in this particular process. Reason, the fallacy or the lacuna in the human mind. We ourselves are not necessarily adept at managing information, or drawing inferences out of information, or recognizing the knowledge that is there and then capitalizing on them. However, the process of knowledge itself passes through 4 segments, which is a very simple, all of us probably would know. Data is generated and that leads to information. Information, when processed and utilized using experiences, it generates knowledge. From knowledge, one generates the wisdom. Knowledge, data per se is typically intended for processing. In the current scenario, more by computer systems. And the aggregated raw material of this data is used to generate information, which is further used for decision making or drawing inferences, making appropriate analysis, decisions, and maybe even capitalization. I'm not going into the specifics of what the data sources are, what are the other dimensions here, because that's a more theoretical dimension there. So I'm not really dwelling much on these specific aspects of sources of data and processing and the like. Information, again, is typically intended for the human being, right? Data once analyzed, once synthesized, once processed and presented in a succinct form, the human mind begins to work with the kind of information that's presented. It's always the kind of experience, fluid mix of framed experiences, values, beliefs. They are the ones that is then used to convert this information, this data that is there, from there, whatever information that we draw. And that, based on inferences, we get to understand what knowledge is. And why typically it's intended for a human being, right? And often this information, data once processed, I'm sure all of us have experienced some portion of this at one time or other. Data per se does not give much insights, but once it is synthesized, once it's aggregated, once it provides its own insight, it gives us tremendous value. And many a time it can also have some kind of economic value, meaning to say we can use that information for profitable ends. And this conversion of information into the applicable dimensions or interpretation of the information in an appropriate manner using the human mind, human intellect, human processes, creates knowledge, which then is used by organizations for its own ends, maybe internal, external, every dimension of their operational capabilities. Wisdom, very difficult to comprehend, and it comes out of much greater and valued experience, which is a result of using information, knowledge in many practical domains, and we recognize the true value through insights drawn over time. It is this repeated experience and understanding that we get out of application of knowledge that wisdom dawns. And it's not going to be easy for us to, the wisdom of individuals and organizations is indeed very powerful. And organizations that have lasted the centuries are not just strong in their information and knowledge, but also in their wisdom. And when one sees the organization in terms of the dimension of this, in terms of time and growth and the information processing ability, it is the human being which is the limiting factor. Typically, when you look at the quantum of output of information and the knowledge that can be generated using this information, it's usually substantial. And many a time, we as human beings try and cope with the quantum of information and knowledge. And I guess this lacuna is the one which has resulted in creating new new domains of expertise, such as data analytics, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and the like. And typically, the point where organizations grow in terms of the time is limited is the point of intersection between the information and knowledge that gets accumulated with human absorbing capacity. So there is a premise here that it is the humans' absorbing capacity, ability to absorb the information, absorb the knowledge, ability to interpret and apply and use it for commercial ends will be the critical defining factor, a factor that contributes to the organization's growth, sustainability, and profits. And I intend to go more specifically to the issues that the current pandemic is obviously current pandemic is putting all organizations and all individuals through. The questions, therefore, are: will people continue to behave the same way they were doing earlier? I think we know the answer already, right? And I think, is it going to be only a short temporary phase, or will it alter the behavior permanently? There's already sufficient literature, or enough literature, that's getting generated, and I was very enthused and very kind of I would say kind of astonished also to see so many academicians jumping into research, primarily looking at the various dimensions of the pandemic, be it in the case of individuals, organizations, nations, and a lot. And a lot of them have also dwelled into previous literature. And already some literature is emerging that this pandemic would probably bring in a more permanent behavioral change, not just in individuals, but also in organizations. Therefore, the answer is definitely very clear. I'm sure many of us are already experiencing it, which is people may not be continuing to behave the same way that they have been doing. Will organizations continue to act in the same manner that they were doing? Again, probably not. Of course, they have a challenge. They have a challenge in trying to comprehend and understand the way the world is changing, the way individuals' behavior is changing, the way in which organization needs to comprehend these changes. Just to cite a few, I think some organizations have already made flexi time or work from home as a permanent feature. Or in terms of legislative dimension, there are enough cases, I think it is in the public domain yesterday or day before yesterday's news, that the number of harassment cases have gone up because unusual calling time, sharing of personal information. So that also brought in a debate on how do you define workplace. So organizations, again, not just in terms of work ethics, work dimensions, but also their own thinking of how they're going to do their day-to-day affairs, business activities. They will have to do soul searching and rethinking on the entire things. And obviously, organizations may not be able to continue the same way in which they have been, because the paradigms are changing. Their customers may change, the perceptions will change, the behaviors will change, the legislations will change, and to that extent, organizations need to cope with all the changes that are happening. Will communities act in a manner that they were doing earlier? I think we are experiencing a lot of it world over, not just in our country, but across the world, where communities ostracization is happening, segregation is happening, and people are pointing fingers here and there. And obviously, there is going to be a lot that will be said, researched in times to come. And invariably, the communities also may not necessarily be acting the same manner that they were. It's quite possible that they may go back to their roots, their personal beliefs, values, and then the manifestation of such beliefs might come in the new, in various behavioral dimensions in the days to come. But that is for us to wait, watch, understand, and learn. Will governments act in the same manner that they were doing earlier? I guess we know the answer there again. I'm sure it is not, right? And we see that there is so much that we have learned from the way government has been doing acting in the last 3-4 months, be it in terms of legislation, be it in terms of governance, be it in terms of um, identifying key issues governing the pandemic and the people of the nation face, the way states are acting and reacting to it. Um, Invariably, it is going to have a substantial. Governments again will have to um, rethink on the way they have been doing things, and they will have to obviously manage the resources that's there in their command, and probably manage things differently. Will nations behave the same way that they have been doing? Answer, I think we have the answer. If you look at Nepal, very interesting case. China, yes. Pakistan, yes. Maldives, yes. US, yes. From G7 to G10 or G11, there's enough evidence that even nations are not necessarily behaving the same way that they have been doing, right? So it is a very interesting scenario that all of us are going through, and it's obvious that we need to try and comprehend the way we look at things, the way we understand things, the way we assimilate, process, use the information that we have. And therefore, it is imperative for organizations to look at this key dimension of knowledge that's in their possession. If only we knew what we know. So it's a very wonderful statement. It says that if we knew what we know now, we might have acted better much earlier, right? I like this wonderful book of Alvin Toffler, right, Future Shock. He highlighted possible future scenarios, and probably he never pondered a pandemic, but then his thoughts definitely are very relevant even to this day, given the pace of change that the world is going through, be it because of technology, because of communication, because of analytics, artificial intelligence, whatever, right? And obviously they are very relevant even to this day. Right, change is not merely necessary to life, but it is life, and that's the reality of it. Okay? And I also like, I've added this quote also: you can use all the quantitative data that you can get, but but you still have to distrust it and use your own intelligence and judgment. Right? Those of us who do understand the realities, who have seen it all for a long time, who value the wisdom that may be there with them or within the surroundings that they live in, or the communities that they are in, or the organizations that they are in, would probably realize that yes, data is important. It's the interpretation it gives is important. It is still the human being who needs to make that judgment, make that decision, whether it's intuitively, whether it is through logical reasoning and processing, or through a very innate or very intricate understanding, or their own self, where they rely on their own wisdom, their own understanding, their own vision, their own application of mind, and then come to this decision. Question on how organizations can look at the pandemic and how they can move forward. While initially I thought I could look at every dimension of individual, organization, communities, governments, and nation, it's too broad a scope, and therefore I've restricted this talk of mine more to literature that is already existing in terms of knowledge management, and the way in which knowledge manifests itself, and how one can use these in the current pandemic scenario. For organizations' survival and success, it's important that they look at some of these that they might have, because as we already just saw, the scenario is not the same. It is going to be very, very challenging for organizations, individuals, nations, and governments to manage this environment. And each one invariably is experimenting, right? Given our own country, we started the lockdown very, very early. And of course, it was definitely predicted that the cases of COVID-19 will go up. But for those who look at just the data, it is alarming to see that we are 190,000 plus and then moving very swiftly northwards. And it obviously sends the chills or the scare across to all of us. And organizations need to also survive. They need to succeed. They need to live through this COVID. And the kind of information that's there in the public domain, the kind of interpretation um, this information generates among people, whether it's the news, whether it's the social media, whether it's the specialists, whether it's the analysts. It's obviously very, very diverse, divergent, and very, very difficult for organizations to assimilate and process through. And therefore, it becomes necessary for organizations to look at what may be the guiding principles which they can use to move through this COVID time. So I've tried looking at a few points purely based on existing literature available in the space of knowledge management itself. The first one is prior and related knowledge, right? This prior and related knowledge confers the ability to recognize the value of new information, assimilate it, and apply it to commercial ends, right? Obviously, the pandemic is generating a lot of information, a lot of research is being done, a lot of data is being thrown out. And organizations need to be able to read not just that information, but also be able to collate that information with the existing knowledge that they have, right? And research has proven that the prior knowledge and related knowledge helps organizations to scale up or improve upon, right? If you didn't have a base knowledge, adding to new knowledge is going to be challenging. When you have a base knowledge, it always makes it easier. Typically, the information, the example given is that of algebra. A student who is understanding of basic algebra, thorough understanding of basic algebra, will be able to do, say, calculus much, much better, right? So that's just the kind of allegory that one could relate in terms of prior and related knowledge. Therefore, it becomes important for organizations to recognize their existing knowledge. They obviously are doing business, they are having a lot of processes. There is a fundamental knowledge that exists within the organization. They need to be able to assimilate the other knowledge that is there outside and collate it with the knowledge that they already possess with themselves. And it's also important for them to have the ability to exploit the external knowledge that they have. Now, it was very interesting for me to see these advertisements in the newspaper. Typical, being an academician, I was very curious about this one. There was this single table and chair which was being advertised. Social distancing table and chair. It's a typical novel table and chair. No additional features to kind of define it as social distancing, but the advertisement said that's the social distancing table and chair. I wish I had got the advertisement clip that I could have shown you. But then that's obviously trying to use the current existing information and kind of behavioral change that is being asked of all of us to maintain social distancing, and therefore even inside classes the social distancing will indeed be the norm. And I'm sure each educational institution is definitely looking at that dimension of social distancing. We are definitely working on ways how many people to be inside the class and thing. But then this advertisement really very interestingly put across, because still going to be the same table and chair with probably distances between two students, but the advertisement very clearly said social distancing, table and chair. Very interesting way of trying to take advantage of knowledge to the existing product. But I'm not giving that as a universal example, but more as an example. The ability of a firm to recognize the value of new external information, assimilate it, and apply it to commercial ends becomes critical for its innovative capabilities. All right. Pharmaceutical industry is definitely taking advantage of it now. All right. There are enough drugs or alternate medicines are taking advantage of it now, where they're trying to say how their product, their features of their products would help individuals to cope with pandemic. But then, is that innovation capability? Is that something very new? It's always arguable. When you look at typical legal definition of that, it's going to be challenging. Right? But then, in terms of generic applicability and use, probably yes. Right? And therefore, the organization's ability to innovate will become definitely challenging. And as I said earlier, prior knowledge with the ability to assimilate external knowledge and integrate it to be innovative is going to be a key factor for organizations to wade through these challenging times. Right? Now, as far as innovative performance is concerned, very interesting studies have been done across the world, but originating primarily in Japan. I'm sure many of us may have used this example, or might have read or heard either in the public domain or through news or through research papers. Many Japanese enterprises allow their employees to kind of come up with their innovations, creations as solutions to existing products and services of the respective companies. Automobile industry is one very typical example. So, the tiny cars in cars, cars with wheels which can move in 360 dimensions. There are many such things that we might have seen as examples. But then keeping that, and studies have indicated that kind of input definitely adds much greater value in terms of the organization's innovative capability. Primarily, there are two areas. The innovative performance of an organization can be internal, based on their own R&D, their own marketing divisions, their own manufacturing divisions. Their own innovations in these divisions will obviously give sufficient insight to them. Right? And obviously their primary orientation is to serve the customers. Marketing department serves the customers. The feedback from customers are always goes through the loop, through the manufacturing R&D, and comes with new prototypes, new solutions, and the like. R&D itself works on new technologies, new processes, new materials, whatever be the kind of industry that they are in. They come out with newer products, newer innovations, newer features, whatever. So that's the R&D's job. And manufacturing itself tries to enough tools of operations management are there, which kind of suggest ways of improving processes, reducing costs, optimization, and the like. All those obviously are features that facilitate innovative performance of an organization. But then the influence of outsiders is very critical, because many a time when organizations look within, right, and they tend to get themselves in a silo, and their thought processes, their actions, their investments are limited to kind of the pool of thought and wisdom that's prevailing within the organization. An outsider's perspective always throws a new dimension. That's where the example of this Japanese firms comes into play. While internally they may have their own processes that bring in new knowledge, new insights, builds innovative performance, create innovative capabilities. It is the outsider's perspective that brings new life, new meaning, new interpretation to the way organization does things. Therefore, it becomes important for organizations to look outside too. And many a time, I'm not sure how many of us may have experienced this. Personally, when I started teaching, say about 3 decades ago, I would probably rely more on the textual knowledge which is there in the textbooks, and my own limited understanding of it. But over the years, as you see things, as you recognize things, as you when others talk about the same thing, when information and experiences are shared, the insight grows. Similarly, when organizations look outside, I'm sure we have seen enough. Social media throws up enough examples of innovative use of products which was meant for X, but used for Y, Z, A, B, C. Typical examples of outsiders' influence on the existence of the use of a particular product. So all I'm trying to suggest here is that when organizations also look for information to be fed from outsiders, the dimensions of knowledge um, change dramatically. And the vistas of understanding, imagination also grows that much bigger. And it's important for organizations to recognize the influence of outsiders. This doesn't, when I say outsiders, it's not consultants. It is anybody and everybody who's an outsider, right? Who doesn't necessarily understand the, um, the internal mechanisms, the internal understandings, or internal processes, product features, and the like. And the third dimension is the intensity of effort. If there is no intent, or obviously purpose is meaningless because you don't have an intent, the output is also going to be not very productive. So intensity of effort is very, very important. I will be looking through some of the typical pitfalls which organizations can fall under. And one of them is kind of being lackadaisical, not being very serious, or rooted in your own belief that nothing is going to happen. Right? So when such things, such negative dimensions bring in or set in, it's quite possible that the intensity of your effort may not be very, very high. So it's important for organizations to have that intensity of effort. So what will be the changes that your organization is facing? What will be the dimensions impacting your organization? It is imperative for the organization to not just recognize those changes by collecting relevant data, assimilating them, interpreting them given the existing or prior knowledge and expertise that they have, but use the other information that they can get from others, outsiders, etc., and utilize it for productive gains within the organization. And the intensity of effort will definitely have a defining say in the way organizations can move forward. Okay. A single conversation with a wise man is better than 10 years of study. Okay. This again is a quote used by Alvin Toffler. It's a Chinese proverb, right? Good. This, I think I did make a mention just sometime, prior knowledge, relying on prior knowledge. Okay. An organization attempting to alter the domain itself is probably a biggest risk that the organization can take. And it's important that they rely on existing knowledge and existing domain expertise. And going into a new territory or uncharted waters is going to be very, very risky. And studies have shown that learning is cumulative, and learning performance is greatest when the object of learning is related to what we already know. It's typically the example that I gave you of algebra. Same is the case with most subjects. If you don't know the basics, you can never build a tower, whatever be the subject of study. This is true even of organizations. So if they are looking to manage the pandemic better, they need to understand what their basic knowledge is and how the new knowledge is going to impact them. and what may be the relevant knowledge that's critical to the organization's success, sustainability, growth, and survival, right, in this pandemic times. And it's also, research has proven that organizations which conduct their own R&D are better able to use external available information. It means, say, there is a thought process of trying to do some amount of research and development internally. Then they are constantly looking at what is their current product, what is the deliverables of the current product, how is it mapping and matching with the customer expectation, what are the dimensions of change that's happening the world over. Is there anything that's happening in the world that makes a difference to the existing product and services? Does it have an impact on any developments that they have to make, any further research that they have to make? And because they are so sensitive to the dimensions of the product and services that they are entering, it becomes easier for them to assimilate, internalize, and utilize knowledge that may come from external sources. And as I said earlier, learning is more difficult in novel domains, meaning, say, something which is new, something which you have not touched in, it's going to be very, very challenging. So if organizations perceive an opportunity, okay, that this pandemic is creating for them, it's important that they recognize where their roots are. And if they jump into a bandwagon which they are not necessarily used to, do not understand, they may burn their fingers very, very badly, right? And they may lose their investment. So it's important for the organization to recognize how new and novel dimensions can impact. Even if they have an internal expertise, they have existing knowledge and they're able to utilize the existing knowledge or expertise, given their organizational setup, products, processes, customers, it would be prior knowledge. Of course, it's very, very critical for organizations to recognize the human capital that exists within the organization, because knowledge doesn't, while it can be in explicit form in records and books, the tacit knowledge is in the minds of its employees, and many a time tapping the tacit knowledge is very, very challenging. Literature and research models do talk about the ways in which one can elicit this tacit knowledge, but that will be a different talk altogether. One more dimension of this managing pandemic is the diversity of knowledge. Working in silos, working with limited knowledge restricts the scope of the organization, restricts the scope of the entity to explore, appreciate, understand, take advantage of the opportunities presented by the pandemic. The studies have always indicated more diverse your knowledge is, the better is your ability to interpret the scenario that presents itself, recognize the opportunities that are getting created, and probably be even more innovative and creative in the ways you manage your organization. I just said you need to recognize the human capital that's there within the organization. However big, however huge the organization is, it is the human mind that ultimately makes the decisions within the organization. Organizations need to recognize this human capital, this human potential that subsists within their organization. They should also be able to tap into this resource to take advantage of the human capital that's there within the organization. There are enough examples. Any person who's teaching HR, or any person who understands or who has dealt with employees will realize that when a critical employee walks out of the organization, he walks with the knowledge that he has assimilated over the years, and it's going to be very, very difficult to get that knowledge back. It creates a vacuum which is very, very difficult to fill, and it takes many years of gain experience and knowledge for the organization to get that knowledge back into place and probably be as productive as they were. So it's important for organizations to recognize the human capital that subsists within the organization. And in terms of this COVID times, while that importance of human capital is never belittled by any organization, it requires to be recognized, appreciated, and utilized. In this COVID time, how do we manage this? Manage the human capital? How do we take advantage of human capital? The first one is gatekeeping and boundary spanning. Gatekeeping is a specialist, typically an individual who understands the kind of expertise that the organization has, the kind of products that the organization has, the kind of innovations that are there in the marketplace, the innovativeness of the market in terms of the product offerings that are there in the organization. So he essentially scans the environment. He looks at what is the new technology, what are the competitors doing, what are the new entrants doing, is there any noise that is coming in the market relating to the product or service. So he becomes an important feeder to the organization. He's like a spotter who looks at what's happening and keeps feeding the information. And his insights will definitely draw a lot of meaning to the organization's way of managing the pandemic. Similar is the role of boundary spanning, meaning to say you need to look at the peripherals, you need to look at what's happening around, and is there any change in dimensions, change in perspectives? Is there any change in, say, technology? Or is there any change in processes? It's important for you to be constantly, pinging the boundaries around to check what's happening, so that you have your feel on the pulse of the industry, of players in the market, and the world across. So this gatekeepers and or boundary spanning is important for organizations to have these people constantly monitor the environment and give the feedback to the organization, so that organization is on having a tab on what's happening and make appropriate changes if possible in real time. The organization needs to be both outward and inward looking. You can't ignore the internal processes while looking at the external happenings. So you need to be both outward looking and inward looking, right? By and large, most of the premise with which I'm talking is that there is an existing organization performing a lot of tasks. It has its presence in the business world. It has its clientele, and it is facing this pandemic. In case of a new startup, they probably have to have a different way of looking at things. But as an organization that's already existing, needs to have, because their own internal resources is also key for their production, productivity, sustenance, growth. So they need to have a vision which is both outward and inward. And very important dimension of knowledge management, which is knowledge sharing, right? And knowledge diversity across individuals. This is a very, very difficult dimension because knowledge per se is very, very intrinsic and internal to individuals. Explicit knowledge is there in books, records, etc. The insight an individual draws, if it is tacit, articulation becomes difficult. And to that extent, sharing of knowledge becomes difficult. When an organization, there's substantial amount of knowledge that can be easily shared, but there are some which is going to be very, very difficult to share. But in which case, you'll only be trying to, give pointers in terms of actions that can be taken rather than sharing the insight. So the internal processes of the organization, the culture of the organization in terms of its knowledge sharing and diversity of knowledge will be a critical factor. When the human capital in the organization is diverse in terms of its knowledge and focused on the organization's products, services, customers, and if there is sufficient knowledge sharing, the responsiveness of such organization to um, changes impacting the customer, the clients, or changes impacting the organization itself because of maybe the external environment, maybe because of the business trends, maybe because of the policies of the government or nations across, it makes it easier for them to reciprocate, respond, and make appropriate adjustments within the organization. So knowledge sharing and knowledge diversity are critical success factors of any organization in these pandemic times. Lockout, right? Again, as I was trying to point this out across earlier, that it's quite possible that organization may sit in a cocoon or put themselves in a silo and say, nothing is going to happen to me, right? I've been in this business long enough. I know my clients, and I'm going to survive, right? It's going to be a misnomer. It will not be appropriate for organizations to lock themselves down and say nothing is going to happen to me. So it's important for the organizations to look out and see how the environment is panning across and what kind of changes are happening. How is it impacting? Who their customers are, who their clients are, what are their thought processes, how is their organizations, entities, or their own perceptions differing and changing, how is their behavior changing, how is that going to impact your product and services, and do you have to make any alterations? The quicker your response is to those changes, the better is the appreciation such organizations are going to have towards you and the services and products that you serve, you provide. So it's important for the organizations not to lock themselves out, right? Another pitfall is typically self-reinforcing. Again, kind of saying the world will not change, nothing will happen, right? Um, in an organization that serves limited clients, it's quite possible that they may in case of lockout, it's quite possible for organizations that are serving limited clients or having only one client, like a typical subcontractor or original equipment manufacturer. You might think that nothing is going to happen to me because the other company is big, they will survive, and the lot. And that can kind of cause a problem. They too need to explore. They also need to expand their horizon. Similarly, people in decision making sometimes can put themselves in a silo saying that nothing is going to happen. They can continue to reinforce themselves. It's like that, who moved my cheese? So this person stays there saying nothing is going to happen. And why is this not coming? Okay, why am I not getting my business, or why am I not getting my cheese? So individuals can still put themselves in a silo and say nothing is going to happen to me. So it's going to be a very, very challenging one. The other dimension is with so many new technologies, with so much of rapid change that's happening. Today morning we were listening to Industry 5.0, right? And the way that technology is going to change may alter the very facet of our behavior, facet of the way organizations do business, the products and services. They are still domains that we probably will be experiencing sooner or later. So it's imperative for the organizations to recognize that there is a possibility of creative destruction overwhelming their organization. So important for them to, again, like I said, you need to have those boundary scanners who looks at what's happening and make sure that the feelers are constantly on and they make the necessary changes that they have to. And there are enough examples that technology decapitating an entire business or industry, right? Electronics replacing electrical, or information technology altering a lot of things. education online. I don't know. There's a lot that we can probably discuss on current education and the way pandemic is changing the education setup too. All right. The other one is appropriability. When a new technology is available, when the organization doing all this recognizes there's a new opportunity, there's a possibility of taking advantage of the new knowledge that is there, new technology that is there, new process that is there, or the new environment that is there, the behavioral shift that is there. It's important for the organization to recognize how they can convert this opportunity into make good business sense out of it, and make capitalize on the business opportunity that's being provided to them. And if organizations do not have this ability, then again they will probably have they will probably lose out on the competition, right? And obviously there's somebody else waiting for the opportunity. Opportunity doesn't wait; it's taken away by the other person, all right? The quantity of knowledge to be assimilated and the ease of learning. When you, I was making this reference, when you have a new novel dimension that you have to go to, the quantum of knowledge is going to define whether you're going to enter there, whether you can you assimilate that knowledge, understand that knowledge, take advantage. If the quantum of knowledge is huge and your ability to comprehend is difficult, it's not possible. It's quite possible that even if the quantum of knowledge is substantial, if the ease of learning is better and easier, one may even venture into that area. But this is again a dicey area where organizations need to recognize and understand, see how they can move forward. All right. You need to be a first mover. When you recognize opportunity, always try and take the first mover advantage, right? Because if you don't, somebody else is waiting in the sideline, right? Many organizations have science and technology, right? And it's quite possible that we may not give it the necessary importance or credence to the science and technology, underlying science and technology. Many of us, the way in which, for example, the way in which smartphones have changed the way we do things. People who are using even conventional phones with single, only talk and receive, make and receive calls. Once they use a smartphone, you can see their world itself has changed, right? And we are definitely making choices of what we can do with that phone, what we cannot do. And probably it's still going to change the way with Industry 5.0 and the way technology is changing. It is probably even going to be embedded. We might be cyborgs in due course of time, right? But organizations need to recognize the value of this underlying science and technology and the way it can bring competitive advantage or make good business sense or bring in prudence to the way the organization does things. Leadership, very, very critical. The leadership defines the way organization moves forward. So it's important that the leaders recognize the uncertainty that they themselves are facing, their employees are facing, their stakeholders are facing, the way in which the environment is reacting, and they need to be able to lead through these uncertain times. Technology will be a factor to be considered. The imperatives of the client needs to be looked in. I think another minute or two, I'll just quickly wind up and I'll open it up for question answers. Imperative of the client, the unconscious bias, very, very important. This is a very subtle bias, though many times it's stopped only from the point of view of human interaction or behavior in organization or people-to-people interaction. It can also have an impact on decision making. That's where this unconscious bias comes. Nothing. You have a bias towards certain things, and therefore you subconsciously move towards that bias in your decision making, in your action plans, right? So it's important for you to recognize this unconscious bias. There's enough discussion and literature that's being generated on this unconscious bias, but I was more concerned about use of this unconscious bias in decision making by individuals, especially if the leader who needs to lead to uncertainty has this unconscious bias. right, or doesn't recognize the underlying science, vitality of the underlying science or technology, you obviously are getting into a pitfall, right? One also needs to have adequate flexibility to ensure that you are able to be malleable enough to absorb the effects of the pandemic and the decisions and the action plans that you have. And it's important for organizations to integrate talent management with knowledge management. When you pick an individual, I said earlier, when a critical employee walks out of the organization, the knowledge moves out with them. When you recruit an employee too, knowledge walks into the organization. So organization needs to recognize these components to be able to manage, right? The references primarily for a lot of the literature relating to the points that I've shared are available in these two papers, right? And thank you to all of you for being with me so far, right? Now I'm open to questions. I think I have another 6 minutes by the time that was allotted. It's 3:24 now, and so maybe let's see as many questions that I can. Hmm? Yeah. Good. Alternatively, you could also email to, is it Padmaja Madam's email? Whose email has gone? Type a message. Can you type Dean at MSRM? Okay. There's a message being typed. My email address is being typed for all of you. Dean at msrm.org. Right. So you could send in your queries. I definitely would respond to all of you. But there's definitely a point that I would like to make. Most of the points that I've shared today are rooted in research and literature. Meaning to say, there's sufficient research that have been done earlier on these phenomena, and the literature is available. I've just given you two references. The reason I picked on these is just primarily to reinforce this point that what is there in the literature is what organizations do use, what organizations do use or apply, it gets into the literature sooner or later. So that was the primary basis with which I've kind of formulated this entire presentation. So I'm looking forward to questions. Y'all can also alternatively type in. Any voices? Anybody? Mute all, invite all. Open yellow mute all tagiri. They might be wanting to talk. Mute all idiyalla, ella mute agide. Remove the mute all. So they might be wanting to ask questions.
Yeah, muted on the road.
Okay, good. So I will. Is there any message? Hello.
That's background.
Done. Can I close? Okay. Thank you, all of you. I'm looking forward to your feedback and questions, if any, on the email address, dean@msrm.org. All right. And done. Thank you. All the best. Log out. Aita. Ladu, this recording